Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Life Alchemy podcast. And today we are going to be talking about the theme of identity. So, identity is something that means something very different to everybody, and this is the thing that I'm so interested in. So, the reason, in particular, we talk about this today is because. Something I would say I'm someone who's gone through multiple identity crises in my life. So, as a child, growing up as mixed race, so I'm half English, half Chinese, but my Chinese father was absent, so I didn't grow up with that strong kind of like role figure, and I always felt like I didn't fit in. So that's one thing. Um, and then growing up in the corporate world, I had lots of, I ended up working in environments with people who came from the top universities like Oxford, Cambridge, very like Etonites, and I am from a working class family, so I always felt like I did not fit in. I used to think, how the hell did I get here? But I appreciate the wonderful, amazing experience that it gave me. And then going through breast cancer at the age of 32 and being bald and boobless in my early 30s, which has led on to sort of problems with fertility. So, and then leaving the corporate world and unlearning, what it's like to be a corporate person and starting up your own business. There are lots of things in my life where I've kind of really struggled with my identity. And what I've realized is I'm feeling like a failure, like, oh, I'm a failure as a British person because I'm not really white, or not clever enough, or from the right social status to be in a certain environment, or as a young woman, feeling with a body confidence, feeling like, oh God, if I don't have boobs and I don't have hair, I'm like so unattractive. Like, who's going to want to come anywhere near me? And then, with the fertility as a woman, God, what kind of woman am I if I can't even have children? So those of identity crises, and what I've learned is that your identity can be whatever it is that you want it to be. So since going through my own work and exploring my inner self and celebrating those parts of what makes me who I am, my spiritual side, that wonderful richness of being sort of biracial, I've actually really come into my own, and I choose those parts of me. And I hate the use of labels. And I just think, we are who we are, and we don't need to put each other in boxes. So with that experience, I'd love to hear from you guys, Roz, Chris, and Hema, with identity. Like, how do you see yourself, and what kind of journey have you been on?
Well, I'm not going to speak for long. I'll let the others talk, but I think and I will answer that question as me in a minute when I've heard from, or when we've all heard from everybody else. But the whole time you were saying that, wearing my therapist hat, I was like, labels, labels,
Yeah.
Labels, boxes. And that was what was, going through my mind. And I even do an exercise with people under hypnosis where I get them to work out what labels are attached to them, like in a shop where you go in and you get the little gun and then you shoot the tag on to the garment. And I have them look up and down themselves and see all these labels that, through really no fault of their own, through societal expectations, through their parents, through their schooling, through where they grew up, their culture, their religion, whatever, they had that label attached to them. And it felt very uncomfortable, or it didn't sit well. And when it didn't sit well, there was a mismatch. And usually, for good measure, we then go, oh, I must be a failure. Because I'm not living up to that label, until you get liberated enough, where you're talking about being Sarah, which is, I'm not having those labels. I'm taking a pair of scissors out, I'm cutting those off, Dekaido, to cut off. And again, I do this as a hypnotic process. It's very liberating. And then I get to attach new labels. And so I will come back on a personal level, but I just thought, she's nailed it immediately, because, I think I can't imagine there's anybody not listening who could relate to that. I don't know how the others think.
Yeah, I can add to that. So I think identity is quite a complex thing. And I think, like, I can talk from my personal experience. I think I never really felt like I fit in anywhere, you know, like I always felt like I was pretending. My family are originally from Mauritius, but my mum came here when she was 19, so she spent most of her life here. But it's just simple things, you know, like even if just language, you know, I was born in this country, I went to a good school, but I still say things that I think are not pronounced in the right way. There's so many little things, nuances of how I see the world, which I think is just really unique. And what can I say? I feel like we spend a lot of our time trying to fit in, you know, whether it's like in the corporate world, is it as a woman or whatever else it is. And it's only when you start to realize that actually I don't fit in any of these boxes and I'm quite comfortable not fitting in them. I've got my own shape and it's not a box. Do you start to feel a little bit better? I've got and it's also interesting, you know, I think there are two things. There are things about what, like those labels, what we expect of ourselves and what kind of these weird things we put on ourselves to think that we must be. But then there's also what society puts on you or the people around you put on you. And so therefore I think identity becomes really complicated. I have a really good story about not fitting in. I'll share it later, remind me.
I think we'll all do those. We probably have to have a rate of 1 to 10, but I'm sure yours will be about.
So yeah, I think I heard. I was watching a TED talk by a lady called Nilofer Merchant. I don't know if anybody's come across her, but she talks about the term onlyness, and it really struck a chord with me because it, you know, it really resonated. The thing that I think is really important is that, you know, like only you can stand in your shoes and see the world through your lens. Like you have that perspective that nobody else has, and actually that's a real strength. And I think if you can embrace that, all these labels and the rest of it doesn't matter. We're much more rich than that. So the label thing, really stuck out too for me.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think identity, you're right. Whenever anything gets really complex, you know me, I'm the guy who keeps things simple. That's what I talk about all the time. And that's what I genuinely believe our souls want. I believe our souls want that simple journey, that next step. What's the next step? And when we complicate things, this is where we get really frustrated. We get angry, and we don't communicate what we truly feel. And honestly, human beings are obsessed with categories. We're obsessed with it. And I personally also believe that from the moment the human race started a subcategorized race, we were always going to head for a clash. We were always going to head for differences being the thing that kind of can bring us together and separate us. When it all boils down to it, we're all part of the human race. It's one race, but we are obsessed with placing each other into boxes to feel some sort of unity. And it's really interesting you say that, Gemma, that onlyness. You know, I've heard that TED talk actually. At first, when you said the name, I didn't recognize it, but I've listened to that and it really brought something up for me that often the deeper rooted thing that hides behind us making categories is that we don't feel good enough stood alone. We don't feel worthy enough being ourselves. We feel incomplete, and it's the biggest lie we tell ourselves.
Yeah, that's Sorry, go on, Roz.
No,
I was just going to say, I think just on that, the lie that we tell ourselves. I was listening to a book yesterday. It's my first Audible book. I'm very excited about it. I mean, I don't know why I didn't jump on this bandwagon sooner. I'd be really, really well read by now otherwise. And there was something, they said that like when a child is born into the world, they are born with an innate sense of wholeness. They don't come out of the womb like into the world saying, "Oh, I don't think I'm quite good enough," do they? Like as a child, everything is, everything is perfect almost, and that's your sense of. And it's only through life experiences do you start to adopt these beliefs, or you adopt these beliefs, or learn. These experiences affect your shape and how you view stuff. So that
100%. I mean, if you think about it. A baby comes from the best hotel ever. A baby comes from this hotel where you get room service 24/7. It's always at the right temperature. You know, all your needs are met. You are protected. You are intimately connected. So, you know, without turning this into a podcast about your human needs, take my word for it as a therapist, all your human needs are met. And so you're born and you just have this innate sense of my needs will be met and everything is available to me. Therefore, you know, I am one. I am, you know, I don't know about the word perfect, but you know, everything's good. And then it's only through experience, you know, like the kind of kick the puppy syndrome. Puppies are really lovely, but if you kick it enough, it'll hide behind the fridge. You know, it's only when life starts to go, oh no, you must do it that way, or don't do that, or be punished because you didn't eat correctly or whatever else, that sense of oneness is eroded, and you start questioning it. And then for good measure, I think what we're all saying, you enter into a culture or a society or, you know, whatever, where, and, you know, obviously I grew up a little bit before you guys. And so, you know, I was a maverick, you know, because I went to a comprehensive school. I grew up in Nottingham. I was a grocer's daughter. My grandparents were grocers and miners, and mill workers up in Yorkshire. I was the first person ever in the history of my family to go to university, and London. And, you know, people didn't really get it. But I just had this draw for it going, yeah. But then when I got there and went into work, particularly because I fell into PR, I mean, you know, the stories I've got about working in PR, funnily enough, we've been having reunions because I was at Lynn Frank's, and I realized even there I was an outlier. I was in what was called the serious department. So it was like, don't let her near John Galliano or like, you know, anybody like famous fashion designer, not that stumpy little girl from Nottingham. No, she's got quite a brain, so give her the other stuff, you know. So you know, but I remember one weekend, one of the girls going, oh, isn't it fun when we get paid because I've got pocket money for the weekend? And I went, I live on mine for a month. You know, my salary pays my rent. And she just went, oh, how novel. You know, like, you know, so I'm sort of with these trust fund babies who'd all gone to like really posh schools down south and the right university. So I was like, you know, you were saying, Sarah, I was like, ooh. And so at that point, it would have been easy to kind of feel really super inadequate. But within me, there's a sort of a rebel. There's a kind of a, I'll show you, you know, that's what comes out at that time.
I think it's great though. We live in an era now where that's being challenged. It's being challenged left, right, and centre. And I think we're seeing a new wave of acceptance and understanding of what actually success looks like and feels like. Do you know, when you were talking there, and Roz, you said it earlier on about failure. I think when people use the word failure, they attach it to their identity. And I was talking to my little girl the other day. She's called Charlie. She's only 10, and she was talking about something that she'd failed at. And as she was talking, I realized she was talking about herself in the failing moment. And at that point, I just stopped her and I said, it's failed, you haven't. And she said, well, what's the difference? I said, because you were after an outcome that didn't come your way, but actually you've walked away learning more about yourself. That's not a failure. Yeah. And I think there's a big difference when we go after something, we attach ourselves, we attach our identity to, oh my God, I've just messed up. And oh my God, I've just messed up in front of all these people. And all these people are keeping count on my failures. And at that point, that's the point we've got to step across and go, it's failed, it's okay. Because if we attach ourselves to the failure, no wonder we feel like pretty bad self-worth because we attach it.
Yeah.
It's just not right.
That's huge. And I know you've got something to say about that, Hammer, but that is huge, Chris, because what you're saying is on one side, a lot of us didn't feel we fit in because we were different.
Yeah.
But we own the bad stuff,
yeah.
You know, and when you hear people, again, as a therapist, people will come and talk to me about my depression. My depression. Oh, it's yours, is it? Yeah. Okay, good. You know, and my cancer. Sarah and I have both had cancer. I never talked about my cancer. In fact, I didn't even talk about the cancer. I called it Jeremy because I hated Jeremy at school. He was the one person I really didn't like at school. And when I, discovered I had the lump, I would look down, in the weeks before the operation, and I would just go, F off, Jeremy. You can just F off out my body. You're not going to be here. You're not going to be here for very long. So, if you own something, it gives it power.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think, sorry, just following that, what you said about that, Ros, about the cancer in particular, is that owning it and that detachment from it. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because exactly the same as you, I was never like, my approach was like just really positive, and I was like, just get rid. And but then even now, sort of nearly 10 years later, people are still curious about it, and they'll associate that with me, and they were like, so tell me, so how is everything on that front? Like,
yeah, me too.
And I'm like, it happened recently, and I just said, wow, that was almost 10 years ago now. I've like moved on from that.
It'd be like going to a kid going, how is it with the braces off your teeth? It'd be like
exactly the same.
I'm 35 now. That was when I was 18.
Exactly.
And also the language, battling cancer. And again,
I hate that.
I'm
surviving.
Sorry, I won't mention the C word that's going on at the moment because we'll probably get banned or something. But the language that the media use, battle and again, it just empowers it.
It does.
Yeah, it does.
It gives a bad thing power.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say, I think you made me think about it, Chris, but also what you both have been saying. It's about switching the language. I mean, you were able in the moment to be really observant with your daughter. Was it your daughter? Yes.
Yeah.
And, most of us were not that observant, are we? Not only of the language that we use ourselves or even in that inner monologue or with other people, we're not that observant to be able to spot it. And I think that's a really powerful thing to do. And I heard it in this book that I'm reading, it was by Oprah, but they talk about changing the question and saying, rather than saying, what's wrong with you, you ask, what happened to you?
Yeah.
And
yes.
Suddenly you shift the focus. It's all about that power. Where do you attribute that power? It's not. Do you know what I mean? And I think
it's a great question. That's brilliant. I think you're right, and I think what we're alluding to here is the power in the story, and the story runs strong. We've got now and again. I just step off my story and I ask myself, is it truthful what I'm telling myself? There's a fantastic Kings of Leon song called "Comeback Story," and it's got a brilliant line in the chorus, and he says, "I've walked a mile in your shoes, and now I'm a mile away and I've got your shoes." And it really makes me think about stepping outside of my own story, but also we don't know what other people are going through until we step across to the other side and see it through their lens. And this is a really important part of that understanding and learning and listening to understand each other, not just listening to respond. I think that's the difference in coaching. That's the difference when you're mentoring. That's the difference when you stay present. You're listening to really grasp what it's like to walk in their shoes, because they might be miles away from where you are.
Yeah, 100%. So, so thinking about sort of how the journey that we've been on and how people see us now, what comes up for you guys? I'm sort of still thinking about this myself, actually, sort of like, what do people see in us now?
You mean in terms of how they see our identity?
Yeah.
And respond to it? Well, look, the Olympics is on. Chris, I'd love to start with you on that.
Yeah. I mean, do you know, obviously I feel really lucky in the sense that I'm part of this exclusive club of Olympians and stuff like that, but I don't really feel any different to how I've always felt. I don't feel any different. And often that title comes with people judging you. Oh, you must be great at this because you do this. I had it on a podcast yesterday that I was on. Someone said, oh, you're clearly fantastic at this mindset stuff. And I went, whoa, hang on a second. every day I work on this. This is not like I woke up and was touched by the Olympic fairy on the head. Like, I work hard at this. So when you hear me kind of wax lyrical about something, it's because I put it in place every day and I fight the stuff it's not. I'm opposed to that stuff. So yeah, it is at the moment, you know, I'm watching the Olympics go by and I'm really enjoying it. But I do worry about a lot of those Olympians that go on that journey of coming out the sport and losing themselves. A lot of them do lose themselves. And that's because I think they get really married to a title, if I'm perfectly honest with you.
Oh, titles, yeah. Just sort of going off on one. I remember I worked with this guy and he kept changing his title, asking for his job title to change, but he was doing exactly the same role. So he was like, "Oh, can I be called this now?" You know, to his boss. His boss was like, "I don't really care what you call yourself, like, as long as you do the job." But it was so interesting, like, fascinate me how, like, he changed his job title 2 or 3 times in the space of 2 years. Really elaborate things. I mean, no one would actually even understand what the hell they did. And it's interesting, that attachment to that title and how important it made him feel, but it didn't have any effect on anyone else. If anything, it was like more confusing. I'm like, oh, I don't really know what you do. But this attachment to titles is a big
or the
one.
perception they have of you. I often think, you know, if I had doctor in front of my name because I'd pushed myself to do a PhD, there's this automatic kudos about it. Oh, you must know what you're talking about. And that's no disrespect to doctors. I've got several in my family and they're very, very, very clever. But they were very, very clever at staying at university and studying a bunch of things, you know, and I'm not saying they're not good at what they do now, but we do automatically assume some sort of added fairy dust on that one as well. So I don't know, Sarah, do you find that if you're successful outwardly looking, people maybe respond differently to you in your life?
Yeah, it's interesting because we sort of talked about this a little bit before, just through a general chat, but didn't we? But yeah, it's interesting how people respond to you based on how they perceive you are doing at a certain time. And it's funny because sometimes when it might seem like, you know, you're on an upward streak, and then you start to hear from people that you haven't spoken to in like forever, and then, you know, and then all of a sudden they're interested in what you're doing, but yeah, you don't hear from them at all otherwise. And then also as well, like, sometimes there are some people who really love it when you're really down. And then when you go the other way, they're like, oh, I don't know. They start to let their own assumptions, or they start to feel uncomfortable. Yeah. And they're like, oh, I don't, like, who are you? But you're just the same person. So how has that affected any of you guys? Like, how people have perceived you at a certain time?
Massively. Do you know, I've got a really good story. I went to, about 10 years ago, I'd retired from swimming and I started doing public speaking and started off in schools, and I went to the school down in Wales and I drove there from Newcastle on the morning for an assembly at 8:30. So I got in the car.
Like getting up early.
I love it. So I got in the car, drove all the way down, got there really, really early because I prefer to be early than late or just on time. And got to the school, and the PE teacher who was organising it had said to us in a text, if you get there at about 7:15, I'll get you some breakfast. So just come in, and do you know what? Since you're driving down, come in, get a shower, get into your kit later on. And then when the kids arrive, you can go and do your talk. So I got there really early, and sure enough, had some breakfast, had a shower, got changed. And I was just in kind of like slacks because I wasn't getting ready to get ready on the stage just yet because I still had a bit of time. So I decided when I went into the hall to put out all the chairs, put everything out. And I was just mucking in. Anyway, the head teacher came in and he went, can you make sure that all these chairs are out? We've got a really special guest turning up. And he went off it. And then he left and he slammed the doors, and I was like, flipping heck, I best get to it. They've got a special guest turning up. So I put all these chairs out and everything all laid out. And the next time I saw that head teacher was when I walked out on stage, introduced in my Olympic
Oh,
tracksuit.
no.
And at the end, he said to us, he went, I am so embarrassed. He said, I thought you were help. I thought you were the hirer to come in to help out. And I said, would it make a difference if I was?
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like when I was dating in my 50s, I went on one particularly car crashy date with a dentist who not only told me about the affairs he'd had while he'd been married, it's like, oh yeah, keep her. But then he was really rude to the waiters. And,
I hate that.
and I was like, you're showing who you are by turning up in this way. And if you think I'm spending time with you, you are very much mistaken.
Yeah.
I was gonna. Oh, sorry, Sarah. I was just going to say I had a really it was like the opposite scenario to Chris's, sort of. So I was once, again, it's a deep story for another time, but once I was arrested. Don't worry, I wasn't charged with anything. And I just didn't understand the concept of, I know nothing about like the criminal world. I just watch like TV, SI, what is it called, SVU, whatever. Anyway, I'm going off on one anyway. And I was arrested, and the policemen were like, you need to get into the car. And I'm like, okay, sure. And I went to get into the front seat. They said, no, not the front seat, the back. Prisoners go in the back. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm a prisoner. What do I do? Got in the back seat. And then obviously I thought I could ring my mum. I ring my mum and dad every night. I was at university at the time. Got to call them, they'll worry. And I asked them, can I call my mum, please? And they were like, okay. Called my mum, that's fine. Anyway, they put me in a cell. They took up my stuff, put me in a cell. They left me there for about 5 hours. It was about 11 o'clock at night until I had my interview with the actual recorder thing. It was brilliant. Anyway, when I finished, they were like, right, miss, you can go. And I'm like, okay, brilliant. So I went outside, and I was always dressed quite well dressed. I was never super relaxed. It just wasn't my style. So put my handbag on, my shoes. I didn't take my shoes off in the cell. I just had my shoes on, just to clarify. Didn't get weird. Anyway, so I got to the front of the where the guard was, and I stood there for about half an hour, waiting very politely for my turn to get my stuff out of the thing that they've taken all my, my purse and stuff away. And after about half an hour, they were like, oh, we thought you weren't the prisoner. We thought you were the lawyer. And it was so interesting, because I think it can happen both ways, can't it? There's times when you're assumed that, I don't know, you're not doing what you're doing, and then there's other times people have got this inflated view of what you are and what you like and everything that comes with it, all on a judgment that they've made on whether
and how you look. And how
Thank God I looked more like a lawyer than a criminal in that moment, but I was the criminal. But
only temporarily, though.
Only temporarily. They got it. It was a big mistake, and I was fine. They're very kind to me.
I think that thing of image is really important, because again, and I'm not saying it's not true today, but when I came up through agency life in the 80s and particularly the 90s, there were all these hacks. We've talked about them before, sit in a certain place in the room, like you with your lovely story, Hemma, about your handbag and your legs
open,
stood in your power pose, because you're in a room full of blokes. And one of the other ones that they used to drum into us, particularly women, was, dress for success and dress to the level that you want to go to. And so there was a lot of that, but obviously I was in PR, so you could kind of mix and match it a bit. So I'd wear like a Gucci jacket and a pair of leather trousers, and then really, really nice heels. So it's that kind of look. But of course, that's why you end up with a mismatch between who you are inside, because it's the classic imposter syndrome, or Sasha Fierce versus Beyonce. That actually you're on stage and you're being Sasha Fierce, and inside you're going, but I'm Beyonce, and I'm like really quiet and I'm really shy. And when you're living a life a lot of the time where your outer image isn't really who you are, imposter syndrome and all of that turns up. And I just think it's a shame that I get it, Chris, it would not work if you were an Olympian swimmer and you turned up wearing, I don't know, a fairy outfit, but clearly trunks are suitable for that you know, and certain times, you know, perhaps if you sign up for the army, you know, you are going to wear a lot of green. But the rest of us, I think, particularly in corporate life.
Well, I was just thinking that was sort of wrapping up in a little bit now, but just to sort of round that up is around exactly what I loved what you said, Roz. And I think the whole thing around identity is having a really strong sense of who you are, knowing who you are inside, and feeling confident and courageous enough to just express that outwardly as well. You know, forgetting about worrying how other people are going to perceive you or whether you fit in, but just being who you really are inside and displaying that outwardly. And I think when you do that, when you are congruent, then that energy, it doesn't really matter what you look like outside, but the energy and that confidence that you exude is so contagious. And that's what people are gonna, you know, it's not if someone walks in and they look amazing, fantastic, whatever, but they might just be so unhappy that everyone's like, oh, well, you know, what's up with them? They've got some weird vibes going on. But if someone walks in and they look not how you would expect in a certain environment, but yet they are really confident, they're really, you know, energetic, and they just are who they are, you know, what you see is what you get. And I think it's that, and I guess it's that, isn't it? That's the goal in a way, is to find that and kind of get to that part of you, sort of that the true you. And there's a lot of stuff that I love working with the clients on, because once they get to that point, they just kind of just excel, and they're just like, yeah, and all of those stories and everything fall away. So just as we're sort of coming to the end, very quickly, has anyone got anything that they would like to share for who to follow?
I've not got who to follow, but I've definitely got a bit of advice that I was given years ago. And that was, you know, when you start to experience success, then you'll start to see people come out the woodwork from all different angles. People just want to hang on to it. And the two things I was advised to do was never let anyone steal your power, and never let it be borrowed. Don't loan it out. You know, it's yours. You've got to keep it. You've got to own it. And, you know, it's less about how you look to other people and more about how life feels to you.
Yeah.
I've been up, I've been down, I've been up, I've been down, I've been both, I've been broke, I've been a millionaire, I've been the whole thing. And it's about the alignment between you, your true self, and any image you're projecting, and how you feel. And sometimes you do have to put a mask on just to push on through for a moment, or wear the uniform because it's appropriate, but don't become the uniform, don't become the label, don't own anything that isn't really you. And people show you who they are, how they turn up. And when you're really successful, or when you're really down, you really do find out who your friends are. So that would be my takeaway.
And the thing I would like to add is, I think we talk, us four certainly talk a lot about being authentic and finding your true self, and that making sure there is that alignment. And I think it's also worth sharing that that's almost like, it's a bit of a journey, isn't it? Like, actually to feel completely aligned. And there are times when you'll go off on a tangent, something doesn't feel right, and then you find yourself again. And so all I want to share is, actually, it's not always, it's an easy thing to do, and you should be able to do it quite simply. I think it's this thing I don't like the word journey, but it is a constantly evolving. As humans, we grow, don't we? We grow and we evolve. And there are times we might lose ourselves a little bit. And there are times where we seek externally for a bit of inspiration, and that's all okay, as long as you go back to yourself to figure out, does it feel right to you? And that's probably the biggest question I think it's worth asking.
Yeah, I love that. I think I haven't really got anything else to add from what you guys have said. I think, you know, you've covered all of it. The one thing that's sort of phrase that is sticking out for me is, you know, you are what you think you are. And if what you think you are doesn't feel right, and it feels icky or off, explore that, you know, and spend some time with that. So I hope that this episode has kind of given you guys, our listeners, something to kind of a bit of food for thought, maybe some little nuggets to take away. If there's anything that we've kind of covered here that you would love for us to kind of explore a bit further, please do let us know. So from me, Sarah Yuklan, it's a goodbye.
From me, Chris, it's a goodbye.
From me, Rosalind, it's a goodbye.
And from me, Hemmer, it's a goodbye.
Tune in again for another episode of Life Alchemy. I'd like to tell you what the next topic is, but that's escaped me. But it'll be fascinating.